Everyone, and welcome to this edition of our lectures. Today I'm going to be speaking about the African Union. So we are in the African segment of the module where we look at how Africa influences the world and how Africa has been influenced by the world. I will not waste any time given that it's a Friday morning. And people have things to do, and we know that we are a distant education institution, so I will not keep you here longer than is required. So let's just get to it. I hope you can see my notes on your end. Let's do it like this. Yes. Okay. The African Union. When we speak about the African Union, it is important that we start by looking at the history of Africa in general. Of course, when you look at my notes, you will see that I start with the colonization of Africa, meaning the colonization of Africa by European powers or European countries or European peoples. But other Africanists or African scholars have said that it is not proper to start with the colonization of Africa because you are starting at a point where Africa is being distracted or disturbed instead of going further back so that you can have a full picture of the political development of Africa. Some, for example, like Sheikh Anta Diop will want us to start in Egypt and trace the history of Africa to Egypt, where he claims that is where most of the civilizations drew from, or inspiration from, to launch the civilizations that we see today, which are very successful. Then they will talk about the various kingdoms that ruled in Africa, the building of the pyramids, the Gizas, the faction, the deities of that time, their special powers, worship, the role of the church or the priests, the role of oracles, the role of the military in political change, starting from that time. And if you look at it from a longer perspective, you can even see that some of the things that are happening in Africa today have been happening in Africa since recorded history, really, if you look at issues of, for example, military coups, because during the time of the pharaohs, we also experienced coups, you also had experienced exiles, you also experienced divisions, you also experienced wars, conquest, all those things that you see today were happening at that time. So it gives you that longer view to say that these are the patterns of African history. But I've chosen to look at the colonization of Africa specifically because that is where the Africans had the sense to unite and then try to protect themselves from external players. When Africa was colonized, of course, the colonization of Africa was not something that happened at once or only after the Berlin Conference, as many people believe. Africans have been colonized for a long time, people colonizing different parts of Africa at different times. So the Berlin Conference really is just the codification and the massification of of colonialism and just making it official priority policy of the Europeans. But it had been done before that, because if you look, for example, here in South Africa, the history will say that the Dutch of the East Indian Company settled in 1652, and then the Berlin Conference does not happen until the early 1800s. So many of the things that we see in Africa today have their nativity during those times. So when the Africans were colonized, they did not sit, for example, you'll remember that here in South Africa, in 1910, when the British and the Boers decided to form the Union government, that is when Africans were driven to action, and also particularly after the signing of the Land Act in 1913. Then you saw that the people started joining the African National Congress at the time, even though it had a different name. But you saw Africans starting to come together to realize that they cannot fight against colonialism, against dispossession, against all the bad things that come with colonialism as separate units. So they need to unite their energy so that they can fight a successful struggle. And there are many ways that Africans did this. Mainly it was conferences. So they would call conferences where students, colonial officials, scholars, and many interested parties would meet at conferences, most of the time in Europe, because you'd find that most of the intellectuals, they went to Europe to study, whether in the USA, even though it's not in Europe, but it's part of that West. Or they would go to England, or they would go to France, and many different places to study. So that was those were meeting points for them. And others might want to even argue that those metropolitan areas were liberal spaces where they could express their ideas, where they could organize themselves and stuff like that. But of course, that would be a contradiction itself, because how can you say that the colonial metropolitan is a liberal space when they are colonizing you in Africa? So it doesn't make sense. It is a contradiction. But in any case, the Africans kept on organizing these conferences, conference after conference, coming up with resolutions, trying to find ways of freeing themselves from the oppression, from the exploitation, and the dominance and the violence that they were suffering from under the Europeans. And then, of course, one of the key organizations or institutions to come out of those conferences was the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. The OAU, as many of you would know, was created with the main purpose of making sure that all African states gain their political independence. But of course, it was not just political independence. They wanted full independence, but at the end of the day, they had to settle for political independence. And that is why in the early 2000s, I think it's 2002, the OAU was replaced by the African Union when it was launched in Durban under, people like Thabo Mbeki, Gaddafi of Libya, Mugabe of Zimbabwe, and many other Africans who have been committed to creating African institutions to solve African problems. Of course, the OAU is celebrated for its work of achieving political independence. And we saw African countries starting to gain independence in numbers after the Second World War. In the 1960s, we saw many countries in Africa receiving their independence. different days. And of course, this has created, or at that time created a culture of anticipation where people were always, anticipating when will the colonial master give us our freedom. And then, of course, when they get that freedom now, there is the parade, the stadium, the speeches, everyone hopeful that the independence will bring about change to their lives. Of course, some of those hopes and dreams were not fulfilled. Instead, people were met with bayonets, with rifles, where we saw a lot of coups in Africa immediately after independence. Most of the countries were going through military coups and counter coups. And there was no serious stability. And also, of course, there were cries for the share of natural resources, people thinking that there are some groups which had been favored by the former colonial powers, and those groups have an unfair advantage in the new dispensation, and they continue to use that unfair advantage to the detriment of those who were hated by the former colonial state. So those are some of the issues that came up at that time, and then the OAU was failing to solve them. Of course, many of the things that I mentioned, of course, the Rwandan genocide, the wars in the Congo, and many other wars in Africa, and also really, if we look at it objectively, the OAU took long to achieve its mission. For example, 1994 being, the pinnacle of the OAU's achievement when South Africa gained independence, political independence. But if you look at from the time it was formed to when South Africa, the last country, gained its political freedom, you can see that it took long. But of course, people can argue that, of course, it takes long to fight against colonialism. And then, of course, these conflicts that kept on taking place in Africa, and of course, Thabo Mbeki has spoken about issues of illicit financial outflows from the continent of Africa. All those things cause underdevelopment, wars, the diseases, the lack of proper infrastructure, the lack of schools, lack of medicine, lack of clinics, lack of hospitals in some areas. But then, of course, in other areas, these issues are not a problem, which also brings in the question of inequality post-independence, now among Black people themselves, or among cities, among towns, among villages. So those are some of the issues that we pointed to underdevelopment in Africa. And also underdevelopment politically, to say that if we say that in Africa we have adopted democracy as the supreme system of governance, but you still have people who want to rig elections, you still have people who want to change constitutions to prolong their stay in power, you still have people who harass the opposition, you still have people who take up arms and remove governments under different reasons and excuses, then you cannot say that you have political development, because the African Union has set a standard to say that as Africa, this is what we want. But if you are saying things that go against that, then it means that they still under political underdevelopment in other areas. But of course, there are some countries which are doing well, which are solving their problems in a democratic manner through dialogue. And in fact, their success in domestically in using dialogue allows them to now work as a freelance dialogue organizers across the continent to try and solve the problems that other people are still undergoing, that they have passed through themselves. Of course, I mentioned that the AU was launched in 2002 in response partly to some of the institutional failures of the OAU, and also partly due to the changing nature of the challenges that Africa was facing in the new millennium. In order to understand what all these efforts of the Africans have amounted to, institutionally speaking, the best place to go is the African Union. The African Union can be categorized as the Constitution of Africa. Should Africa really be serious about unity and solving its problems its own way? So, in a sense, what we are going to be engaging in now is a constitutional law exercise rather than a strictly political exercise, even though I will make examples which will show the political aspects of all these things. Firstly, let's just look at the objectives of the African Union. The first one is to achieve greater unity and solidarity between the African countries and the peoples of Africa. So basically, the AU itself is created for that. That's what the AU does. You know, when it holds, for example, its ordinary assembly sessions, it brings together different leaders. It brings together different diplomats. It brings together different interests. It brings together different bureaucrats, researchers, you know, different types of people. So it brings about the unity that it seeks to bring about in itself. But also, not only, it doesn't only seek to bring unity institutionally or government to government types of relations, but it also wants to make sure that there is unity among the peoples of Africa. For example, it has in its agenda 2063, it has one of the objectives is to silence the guns in Africa. Meaning that, of course, if you silence the guns, then it means that now you are creating unity among Africans, because instead of solving their problems through violence, through guns, then they can find alternative means of solving their problems, and you can have solidarity and unity from that peaceful solution or resolution of conflicts. The second objective of the Union is to defend the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of member states. You will remember that, of course, colonialism had to do with the territory. When England was a colonial master over an African country, it meant that they actually controlled the ground, the territory, the sea, the air, whatever, of that particular country. So quite naturally, the Africans would be very mindful of protecting their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, and independence of the member states. Of course, this is an objective. It might not happen in reality. For example, other scholars have raised the issue of the presence of the military bases of some world powers on African soil, to say, does that not threaten our sovereignty if other people bring their weapons here, and we don't know one day whether they will always be friendly to us, or one day they will turn on us? Does that mean that we are safe? And territorial integrity, again, we can even add the issue of illicit financial outflows under this, because now the people, they dig the ground, that's the territory, and then the people don't benefit from the ground, and then they take the minerals away, or they take the resources away. So, and then the independence, meaning that every state must be able to make its own decisions as an independent state and as an equal member of the African Union and the international community. Of course, I've said that this does not always happen in reality. You'll remember that when the OAU recognized Western Sahara as a member, Morocco withdrew from the OAU, and Morocco has just recently been readmitted by the African Union. But those are some of the issues of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence that the African Union should be solving. But so far, that issue is not solved, because there was that withdrawal and then readmission, but Western Sahara is still not free. According to what the African Union has said itself, that it should be free. And then also there was that issue of Somalia and Eritrea, which also to an extent has been solved. And then the DRC, you cannot speak of territorial integrity in some parts of the DRC, and some scholars have actually argued that the DRC is Africa's civil war, because there are so many, there are so many, or the Balkans War of Africa, whatever. But it's a bad situation because you have so many different players playing a role in the conflict for different reasons. Some for because they are supporting the clansmen, their tribesmen, some because of natural resources, some because of some mere survival. So people are involved for different reasons in that conflict, which makes it very difficult to resolve, particularly in those areas where the conflict has been going on for a very long time. And then, of course, you had the South Sudan, and then the Sudan matter, where there was a war. They had to split, and then Sudan became Africa's newest nation when it gained its independence. And of course, it gained its independence, and then also after that, it also started fighting with each other, with Riek Machar, with his opponents. So you see these things repeating themselves throughout the history of Africa, where you find that the Africans have a particular principle, but in reality, it is not being implemented. For example, at the moment, recently in the news, we have heard that there is an opposition member of parliament in Lesotho who has said, or who has urged the Basotho legislature to pursue regaining or reclaiming land that belongs to South Africa, which they claim that belonged to the Basotho before, and the Basotho were displaced by, I don't know whether the British or the Boers, but by the Europeans. So now they're saying, now, since if you're saying we are free now, then you must bring back the land that was taken by the Boers or by the English from us. So those are some of the issues that of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of member states. And after a while, we get to this, because now this is a border issue, and also the Morocco issue is a border issue, the Somali issue is a border issue, the Sudan issue is a border issue, the DRC, even though it might not be a border issue, but it's an issue of independence, secession. People saying that, we want to rule this region, because we feel that if we rule this region, then we will benefit from the resources. But if the region is ruled by the national government, then our people might not benefit from the resources, because now the resources have to be shared with the rest of the citizens of the state. So many of these issues are related. Of course, now there are also these extremist groups, for example, Boko Haram in Nigeria or in North Africa, and then Al-Shabaab, Central Africa, East Africa, Buremach in South Africa. You have also, you've had assassinations where it was alleged that the Rwandans or the Rwandan government ordered the assassination of a Rwandan former government official who was residing in South Africa, which also brings those issues of territorial integrity to say, if a person is under protection, are you allowed to come and assassinate that person? What does that say about our territorial integrity? And also, what does it say about our independence? Because South Africa is a party to some international agreements, which might say that we must provide political asylum to people. So if we give people asylum and you come and kill them, what does that say about our independence and also our sovereignty, really? Because, it is a threat to sovereignty if someone comes into a country to assassinate someone. So those are some of the issues that we see on the African continent. The third objective of the African Union is to accelerate the political and socio-economic integration of the continent. Of course, now there are a number of instruments that have been developed by the African Union to achieve these things. For example, the common position on the free movement of people. Basically, the idea of this policy or of this common position is that since Africa was divided into these colonies and into these clusters of colonies, linguistic clusters, it has made it very difficult for Africans to communicate, basically, and to interact with each other, and also to even trade with each other. So now the response is that you must allow African people to move freely on the continent so that they can interact with each other, so that they can see opportunities in the continent and they can see problems in the continent that need fixing. Of course, there are some people who are very skeptical when it comes to the free movement of people, because they will say, but what kind of systems do we have to protect our citizens from trans-border terrorism, for example? What kind of mechanisms do we have to protect our citizens from transnational crimes, such as car thefts, stock theft, human trafficking, drug trades, and all of those things, the small arms proliferation, machine gun proliferation in the country. So how are we going to make sure that those things don't happen while we allow people to move freely? And also, how are we going to make sure that people don't abuse this free movement of people to escape from justice, to commit a crime in Algeria and go and hide in Djibouti somewhere? So those are some of the things that the Africans have to think about, because at the end of the day, if you allow people free movement, that must not compromise the security of the people of Africa, because now if it does that, then it defeats the whole purpose of trying to make people interactive. Of course, there is also a specific agreement which has been signed and now is in operation, the African Continental Free Trade Area. Africans have been talking about this for a very long time, I think from the times of the OAU, but finally it happened. And then now African states have signed this, and then it's designed really to facilitate trade, particularly dealing with issues of tariffs, duty-free imports, exports, and all of those things, to facilitate trade within Africa. Research will show you that African countries are in a very bad situation where they trade more with European countries, with Asian countries, than they trade among themselves. Now, that doesn't make sense in a sense, because you would feel that if I'm looking for some cold drink, the logic is that I'm going to go to the next next shop, the closest shop. But it doesn't happen like that in the case of Africa. If you want something, you have to go away from the continent and then bring it into the continent in order to have it, instead of getting things from the continent. So we can even save a lot in terms of transportation fee, because the logic being the longer the distance, you have to transport the goods, and the more petrol you have to use, or the more gas you have to use, the more time you have to use, then the product will be more expensive. But if you buy it locally, it's been created here. There are not a lot of costs that go into the manufacturing of that thing, provided that you have the raw materials for creating that particular product. But in any case, that is what the African governments are trying to do, to facilitate trade. And also, you remember, even in Western thought, there is a belief, and I think it's Immanuel Kant who's credited with coming up with these thoughts. The democratic peace theory, which says that the more states trade with each other, the more peaceful they will be towards each other, because you don't want to harm the person who sells you your bread, because you depend on that person for survival. You are in a mutual relationship. They give you the bread, you give them the money, they do whatever they want to do with the money. So also I think that the Africans are tapping into that to say that, if maybe we trade with each other, then we might like each other more. But of course, I don't know whether that always works, if people always like people that they trade with, from an individual perspective. The fourth objective is to promote and defend African common positions on issues of interest to the continent and help people. Meaning that when Africans have a position that they've adopted in the assembly of the African Union, there should be no country that goes against that, particularly in international platforms. For example, if the African Union has resolved that in the Ukraine-Russia war, Africa supports Russia, then Zambia cannot go to the UN and say, no, we are supporting Ukraine, because now they will be going against a common position of Africa. And it's very difficult to even reach that common position, because you need a two-thirds majority in order to reach that common position. So meaning that, unlike a simple majority, you have to work more in order to get the common position passed, meaning that now people must be loyal to it, because it means that it represents the majority of not only just the majority, a two-thirds majority of the people of Africa, or the representatives of the people of Africa. Of course, this was not implemented, particularly when one looks at Resolution 1973 on Libya, which authorized a no-fly zone over Libya, but was used in a manner that many people later regretted, particularly even countries that actually signed that resolution later regretted. And the former president of South Africa, for example, President Jacob Zuma, came out and said they were misled by the United States of America in terms of the wording of the resolution. They thought that the resolution only would target military establishments, not to target other useful institutions in Libya, which would then be required after that mission is complete. So meaning that it was now used to incapacitate Libya rather than to protect the citizens, who were the main target of the resolution. And of course, the Africans also have positions on the rotating membership of AU member countries on the United Nations Security Council. Of course, that has not happened. Many people have spoken about the senselessness of not involving Africa in the Security Council, meaning that decisions about the future of Africa are made by other powers, which really then brings to mind the question, how can you say then that you have stopped Hitler, you have freed the world, but you still exclude other people from decision making? So basically meaning that you might actually subconsciously agree with Hitler that there are some people who are superior to others, who should rule over others, and there are others who should be ruled, and just do whatever the rulers have said. And then, of course, the question is, does Africa have common positions on some of the key issues in the world? For example, on cybersecurity, does Africa have a common position on that to even defend in the first place? For example, does Africa have a position in the war in Syria and Ukraine, or are different African countries doing their own things in relation to those conflicts? Does Africa have a policy on the South South China Sea conflict, or they don't have a position. There are so many issues that Africa should be having a position on, a position first, and then defending that position in international platforms. Again, the African Union is expected to encourage international cooperation. So basically what we've just been talking about, ensuring that African states, play their role in the international community, but also being mindful that the international instruments are not used against Africa, but they are also used for the benefit of Africa, because that's what many people have been saying, that most of these institutions, it seems as if they are created for Africans. They don't apply to other people, they only apply to Africans, because other countries are powerful, then some of the sanctions do not apply to them. Question has been asked, if the United States invaded Iraq without the sanction of the UN Security Council, and many people died, and the main reason why they went there, or the stated reason why they went there, was false, then why are the people responsible not charged with crimes against humanity? Because it means that they've killed people for no reason, for no just cause. But when it comes to African people, you have post-election violence, people kill each other, and then you find yourself at the ICC when you actually didn't have anything to do. Maybe people are just fighting somewhere in some village, and they are not even an organized army that you can give orders to. But you would say you have to go to the ICC, you have to answer for that. But people who actually give orders to armies don't go to the ICC. So those are some of the issues that African scholars and politicians and activists have been raising in relation to international institutions. Of course, I have said that one of the failures of the OAU was that it failed to ensure peace and stability and development on the continent, even though it did help many countries to receive or to gain their independence, political independence. Of course, the African Union has to do something opposite. It has to promote peace, promote security, stability on the continent. But of course, the presence of the Peace and Security Council, and then the Assembly, and being with the main organs that play a role in this area, does not prevent conflict. Again, even last year, we saw coups in Africa in 2022. We also saw military coups in Africa in 2021. We still see a lot of underdevelopment, particularly in those areas where there are conflicts. Children not going to school, drug addiction of young children, which is also a security threat, and also a threat to the stability of the continent. So we still see so many things that are going wrong, despite the objectives and the promises of an African Union government. Of course, I mentioned earlier that Africa has chosen democracy as the system of government in Africa. Of course, they could have chosen many systems, because we know that in Africa, for example, many parts of Africa have the royal system or the monarchy. They could have chosen a monarchy, but they said democracy. They could have chosen a dictatorship, but the Africans said democracy. They could have chosen a system of rule by generals, but the Africans said no, we want democracy. Or they could have chosen a system of rule by the aristocracy, or by the wealthy, the oligarchy, but they said no, we want to be a democracy, meaning that the will of the majority rules, of course, provided that the will is allowed to reign free, and that the powerful do not use their institutions to suppress the will of the majority, or to influence the will of the majority against the interest of the majority. So those are some of the things that the African Union wants to see in Africa, particularly popular participation and also good governance, to say that when people are now in government, it should not be about themselves, but it should be about creating stronger institutions, creating capacity to solve problems, and making sure that resources are used in a sustainable manner, that other people can also benefit from the resources in future generations. Of course, I've mentioned that Africa was colonized, so that's why Africans are very sensitive to human rights, because during colonialism you don't have any rights. You are property. You are a hand. So basically you are a tool in the system. So you don't have any rights. So that's why Africans, they are very sensitive about human rights, and they want to promote, not only to promote human rights, but to ensure that they are protected, because it is not useful to have rights in a Bill of Rights written there when they cannot be protected by anyone. So if someone says you have a right to life, but people can still kill you, you see, what's the use of having that right to life when people can still kill you? So it must be protected. So it must be guaranteed. So when they say rights are guaranteed in the Constitution, it must mean that it's guaranteed that if you have a right to life, then no one is going to kill me. So it's guaranteed that I'm not going to be killed. Or if I have a right to freedom of speech, it must be guaranteed that, if I want to speak, if I want to publish a book, I'm going to have an outlet to publish a book, and not have a situation where you find that in Africa, most of our books are produced by, Western publications and all of that. But we are writing books, and then we don't have materials to produce books. So those things should not be happening. So you shouldn't say that the person has a right without giving them the means, or allowing them to get the means to actualize that right. Because if they are not actualizing that right, it might as well not be in that Bill of Rights, because it doesn't mean anything to him, because a right is supposed to be exercised, not to be read. And of course, again, Africans want to play a role in the global economy and in international relations. Not just a role, but a rightful role, a meaningful role, not just to be there in the assembly of the United Nations, but when the key crucial decisions are being taken by the Security Council, you are not there. So meaning that you are given participation, but you are not given power. So it's a tricky situation. Do you just hang around there, just being told what to do, or do you start to try and create your own power somewhere else if they don't want to give you power in the United Nations? Of course, again, I've spoken about sustainable development. And just an important thing to note, Africa has a number of economic communities. So it's like a cluster system where if you're in the Southern Africa, you belong to SADC. If you are in West Africa, you belong to ECOWAS. If you're in the North, you belong to the Maghreb Union and stuff like that. So basically, what these sub-regions try to do is what the free trade area agreement wants to do for the entire continent of Africa. So they want to do it for the regions, and then the others want to do it for the continent, which brings up one of the key debates in the formation of the African Union, where we had a debate between Thabo Mbeki, former president of South Africa, and Gaddafi of Libya, where Gaddafi was saying that we must not even contemplate the idea of having these regional economic communities. We must go straight for African economic community, because these regional blocks will develop a life of their own that might actually become an impediment when the time comes for a continent-wide economic unity. And Thabo Mbeki was saying that that would be very difficult to do. Let's do it gradually, so that we check, trial and error, and see what works, what doesn't work, so that we don't do something that will become a colossal failure. So those were the big debates on these regional economic communities between those two African politicians. Of course, promote cooperation in all fields of human activity and to raise the living standards of African peoples. Of course, meaning that at all times, African government must be working towards improving the standards of living of people, and also cooperating with each other on the continent, and also with other governments and other Africans in the Caribbean, in South America, or wherever they are. And of course, there was a talk at some point. I don't know where that ended. Maybe I'll check it out after this lecture. There were some Caribbean countries that wanted to join the African Union as a member, because the idea of African unity is, of course, is a continental idea, because Africa is a real physical thing. It's a continent where people stay. But also it is also spiritual, meaning that we realize that because of some political developments of the past, there are Africans all over the world who are also Africans and sharing the history and the future of the continent. And of course, the African Union is supposed to play a role of the coordination and harmonization of policies, which is one of the most difficult things currently in politics, because you find that many of the countries would have signed international agreements, but only to find that they have not localized what they've signed internationally in their domestic legislation. And then you find that there are conflicts. So meaning that the policies domestically are not aligned with the agreements that they've signed internationally. And it's the same thing with the African Union, meaning that the African Union might have certain policies, but you might find that they are not being implemented in member states. That is why they will have things like a peer review mechanism, and you have your things like your NEPAD, where it's a kind of centralized planning to say that, okay, we must have a particular direction that we are moving towards, and we must be able to measure the progress that we are making as we are working. And of course, promoting research and development on the continent, science and technology. Not only to have Wakanda in the movies, but to have Wakanda in reality in Africa, where Africans are able to solve their problems in record time and are known as people who solve problems in record time. But of course, and also Africa is in a very advantageous position, because our politicians always say that we are the most youthful population in the world, with an average age of somewhere between 14 and 18 years of age, meaning that there's a lot of potential in Africa. Not only potential, but there's also proven success, because this youth is not coming from nowhere. There are people who have been working before them to build the continent. Of course, not everything is happening the way it's supposed to be happening. But if you teach young people science, technology according to the Africans, and promote research in all fields, then we can find people who can solve the problems that the continent faces. Of course, working to heal the continent and making sure that there's good health on the continent. Of course, you know that one of the things, or one of the sticks with which Africa is beaten, is that you are not able to save yourself. A new disease comes around and it wipes a huge section of your people, because you are not able to cure diseases, you're not able to prevent, to vaccinate, and all of that. So the Africans have taken that as their challenge to try and do that. But of course, now we saw recently with the COVID-19, where most of the governments were getting their vaccines from other countries and only saying to their scientists they must develop their own vaccines as a reaction after they have been caught off guard and had to pay other sciences to develop vaccines for them. Okay, having gone through the objectives, and I think that we have come a long way. From the objectives, you can see that the African Union has set for itself a huge task, a repair task to repair the damage that was done by colonialism and the various types of abuses that Africans have gone through under the hands of many different nations, be it Asians, Europeans, and the like. So in order to achieve these things, the African Union believes that there are some principles that must ground all of this work, that all this work must be housed under these principles. And the first one is sovereign equality and interdependence among member states. So what this means is that, as I was saying earlier, that all members are equal members of the Union, and all members are interdependent. This is very simple to explain because, for example, South Africa has two neighbors, very intimate neighbors, Lesotho and Swaziland. Lesotho is completely covered, surrounded by South Africa, and it's a small country. If Lesotho were to have a conflict with another African country or with another country of the world, South Africa would be affected because of the interdependence that exists by nature of the facts of geography, that Lesotho is completely surrounded by South Africa. So that in the interdependence is seen very simply in Africa. So that is why whenever African leaders interact, they must bear that in mind, that whatever decisions they make, they might affect other African countries. And also this interdependence is also reflected in one of the, okay, of course, now if you look at the fourth principle, for example, the common defense policy, it also speaks to the interdependence of member states, to say that since we were colonized individually, now if colonialism visits us again, we must make sure that we have united our energies, our intelligence, our weapons, all our defenses, so that it doesn't happen again. And then, of course, respect of borders existing on the achievement of independence. Of course, this is also one of the biggest issues and one of the most researched issues in Africa, where the source of some of the conflicts have been found in border disputes. The argument being that the Europeans, when they came to Africa, they didn't consider whether you are Zulu, you are Maasai, you are Kikuyu, whatever. They would just divide the land. So you might find that they divided 20% of Kikuyu now belongs to Tanzania, and then 80% is in Kenya. So these people now are living in different countries, but they are one people, So all these things create problems. And then others would say, so why should we respect the borders that were created by the colonists? Because the colonists, when they create borders, they are creating borders because of their own aims. And we have new aims. So why don't we create new borders? Because we have new aims. We don't have colonial aims. So those are some of the arguments with regard to that. The participation of African peoples in the activities of the Union. This objective is mainly played by the Pan-African Parliament, where you find many people, even opposition members in different member states having an opportunity to be part of the Pan-African Parliament. Or again, the common defense policy, which of course we didn't see in action when Libya was being attacked under the camouflage of that resolution, 1973. In order to help the organization carry out its work, the union created a number of organs. And out of all these organs, the most important is the assembly. There is no easy way to make it to the African Union and actually be a decision maker, other than being a president of your country. So there are no shortcuts. You have to be a president of your country so that you can be a member of the assembly. And then, of course, we also have the Executive Council. We have the Pan-African Parliament. We have the Court of Justice. We have the financial institutions. We have the Commission. We have the Permanent Representatives Committee, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. The Assembly. I've said that the Assembly is the most important body of the Union. It is made up of heads of state, presidents. It is the supreme organ of the Union. So when I was thinking about this, to say that the Assembly is the supreme organ of the Union, I thought about what is the supreme organ in human beings, because it would be equivalent to that. It meets at least once a year, and sometimes it can have an extraordinary session, but then you need 2/3 of the members of the Assembly to decide to have an extraordinary session. The chairperson of the Assembly is for a duration of 1 year and can only be a president, a head of government, or a head of state. Maybe it's your responsibility now to check who is the chair of Africa this year. The Assembly reaches its decisions by consensus, meaning that things are discussed, they are deliberated, that the primary instinct is not numbers, but deliberation and dialogue. Of course, this system has its own problems and it has its own strengths, and you can consult the work by Kwasi Wiredu titled Democracy by Consensus, Some Conceptual Considerations. So again, this means that the Africans do not only choose democracy, but they choose a particular kind of democracy, meaning they choose democracy by consensus as their primary instincts. But of course, the Africans realize that it might not always work. You might not always find agreement because sometimes the issue is divisive or emotional or emotive. And then in that situation, you will need 2/3 to reach that decision or to pass that decision. Now, this brings the question, is that bar not too high? To say that if you want to make a decision, you need 2/3 of Africans to agree. So if people do not agree by consensus, how are they going to agree by 2/3 majority? So those are some of the issues, because if you can't find consensus, then how can you build consensus for 2/3, for 2/3 of the people to agree with you when you can't find 50 people, 50% of the people at least to agree with you? Or does consensus mean everyone must agree? What does it mean? So that's why we have to educate ourselves on what does this consensus mean. Does consensus mean the same thing as, democratic centralism? We discuss something, we take a decision, and then we all go by that decision. What does it mean?
Of course, now for procedural matters, the Assembly can make changes by a simple majority. So you don't need a two-thirds majority for that. The functions of the Assembly include determining the common positions. For example, I spoke about the common position on free movement. It means that it came from the Assembly. It could not come from anywhere else because it's only at the Assembly that can determine common positions. Of course, again, the common positions are decided by consensus, failure of consensus, two-thirds majority. The Assembly also receives, considers, and takes decisions on reports and recommendations. You'll see later that the Union has specialist committees which do research and they do studies, and then they have to report to the decision makers. So basically, meaning that everything or every division within the Union works to feed the Assembly, works to support the Assembly, since the Assembly is the chief organ of the Union. It can admit and suspend members. Again, earlier on, I spoke about the fact that other Caribbean countries wanted to join. So it is the Assembly that would admit or suspend them. Of course, we know that Morocco, of course, withdrew when the OAU gave or recognized the Western Sahara as an independent state. And then we have seen this admission, suspension being applied in a preferential manner. For example, Egypt was suspended as a member of the AU after the government of the Muslim Brotherhood was removed by General Fattah Abdel al-Sisi. And then in Burkina Faso, we also saw the government there suspended, the interim government being suspended after the coup. But in Zimbabwe, that did not happen. They were not suspended. In Sudan, they were suspended, and then after some time, they were recognized. And in other places, they are not suspended at all. And also in Haiti, we saw the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, who was the president of the country, which also is a matter of concern for the African Union if we are going to allow or admit members from the Caribbean. How are you going to ensure that you protect them from bad things that happen in international politics and domestic politics? The Assembly is also responsible for establishing the organs or other organs of the AU. So that's how powerful it is. So it's responsible for all the movements of the African Union. It also implements and monitors the implementation of policies and decisions. So that's why I mentioned earlier the issue of the peer review mechanism to check, not only to have a standard that you want to reach, but also to continuously assess whether you are on track to achieve what you want to achieve. The Assembly is also responsible for the adoption of the budget. Of course, when one speaks about funding money, Africa, one immediately thinks about aid. But of course, now these days, African leaders are bold. They are saying we don't need aid. Aid is the problem because aid is used by the NGOs. Sometimes it doesn't reach the intended beneficiaries and maybe used also for wrong things. And of course, Mugabe's gesture of gifting a head of cattle to the African Union was also one of the ways to support it, to say that, there are so many ways that you can contribute. It doesn't have to be dollars. You can contribute whatever you have. Of course, now, the problem now is how do you transfer a head of cattle into money that you need for building a bridge? something like that. And other members don't pay their membership fees, and then there is no punishment for that. Others would also even mention that some buildings of the African Union were funded by foreign players. Maybe they want to gain favors from the African Union. So there are many of these debates in terms of the budgets and actually saying, does Africa have enough money to do all these things that it has to do? Because all these things need money. Or is Africa going to go and beg for money from the West, from Western institutions, in order to do the things that need doing? And the Assembly also gives directions to the executive on matters of peace and security and other emergencies. Of course, I mentioned COVID-19, in Ebola, floods, earthquake, coups, droughts, bad harvests, plagues, so many things that happen. So the African Union is supposed to respond. But of course, we don't see this in reality because there are so many places that go through these things. Like for example, Mozambique is prone to floods. And then also we saw recently in KwaZulu-Natal, we also saw floods. But where was the African Union? That's the problem that the African Union faces, that it wants to do things, but then it doesn't have money to do all the things that it wants to do. The Assembly can also, or is also responsible for the appointment and the firing of the judges of the court. I don't know whether I should just bring this up now, that maybe we will educate ourselves later when we look at the document that deals with the establishment of the court itself. But what is striking about this is that the Africans have the courts of justice, but they don't have any correctional system in place, meaning that there is something that is not working well in the chain, because normally you would have the police first of all, and then you would have the courts, and then you'd have the prisons. But with the African system, you seem to have the courts of justice only. Or is it relying on the country-specific justice or prison systems whenever they've done their judgment? Because they are expected, I think they would be expected to deal with issues of these crimes of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and all of these genocides and stuff like that. So if you judge those cases, where are you going to store those people should you find them guilty? It's something that should be there, but unfortunately it's not there in the act itself. The Assembly also appoints the chair of the AU Commission and other executives. Some scholars have argued that this has now become the main business of the Assembly. Who is going to be the chair of this? Who is going to be the chair of that? And the politics that goes with it. Which region is going to get this position this year? Which region is going to get this position this year? Which faction of regions is going to have its candidate succeed? So meaning that now everything is no longer about, most people are no longer concerned about the main issues, which is to develop Africa, to make sure Africa is peaceful. Now it's more about politics. It's more about who gets to control the union. We saw this a lot, or maybe in its intensity, when Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma was contesting for this position. So we saw that a lot of lobbying, a lot of regionalism, a lot of linguistic differences coming up and stuff like that. And then we have the Executive Council. The members of the Executive Council are foreign ministers of member states and their delegates, meaning that it is the foreign affairs or the Department of State of the African Union. It holds its meeting twice a year, Of course, meaning that this is a high level structure, because of course high level structures do not normally meet a lot, because you can even think, logistically, if ministers of foreign affairs have to meet at one place, with Africa being so big, the logistical challenges that poses. But at least now we have technology, we have your Zoom and stuff like that, and then they can meet. But of course, now that also brings in issues of cybersecurity, because I would believe that some of the issues that are discussed are of a confidential nature. So those are some of the issues. So they are supposed to hold their meetings twice a year, and they can call, the assembly can call an extraordinary session if 2/3 of its members agree to do so. It can make its own rules and procedures. So nothing much about that. So meaning that it has some form of independence, even though it works for the support of the assembly. So the EC is responsible for a number of areas of operation, for example, foreign trade, energy, industry, and mineral resources, food, agricultural and animal resources, livestock production, water resources and irrigation. I think you can just read for yourself these things: environmental management and protection. You remember that we had Wangari Maathai, who was an environmental activist and politician, who is reputed to have planted over 1 million trees and encouraged many people to plant many trees and to save the environment in general. I think that she won many prizes for this. I don't know, I think the Nobel Prize as well. If you go to Kenya, I think they have roads or a main road, a big road named after her. So the union also wants Africans to be mindful of the environment, particularly given the politics of climate change and global warming that is doing the rounds in the world, and is receiving serious attention from people who may not have given it serious attention before. And then, of course, I've spoken about disaster relief. So floods, war, earthquakes, bird harvest, plagues, HIV, Ebola, COVID-19, TB, diarrhea, blood pressure, all these diseases that people are facing. This EC is supposed to ensure that they are solved and that there are resources that are allocated towards solving those problems. And then transport and communications. And later on, you'll see that transport and communications can be used also as a punitive measure against misbehaving member states. So if you misbehave, the Africans can block you from using the transport routes and the communication routes. And then, of course, the insurance. The EC is responsible for matters of insurance, national residency and immigration matters, social security, mother and child policies, and the system of African rewards, medals, and prizes. So this is what the EC is responsible for, or is responsible to the Assembly, as I've said, and is responsible for the task of monitoring and evaluation, and can bring any member before the Assembly. I did speak about the committees before. The EC has specialized technical committees. They are responsible to the EC. You have the Rural Economy and Agricultural Matters Committee, Monetary and Financial Matters, Trade, Customs and Immigration, Industry, Science, Technology, Energy, Natural Resources, and the Environment, Transport, Communications, tourism, health, labor, and social affairs, education, culture, and human resources, The Assembly may add any new committees or remove existing ones. So the Assembly carries really the governance job at the Union. They make the decisions. So this subcommittees or these technical committees have certain functions that they play. For example, they prepare projects and programs of the Union and submit them to the Executive Council. So they are support. So basically, we can see that we have a structure of layered support. So the technical committees support the EC supports the Assembly. So all these things are supposed to work together in a coordinated manner, but which ultimately ensures that the people in the Assembly make the correct decision because they've been given all the information that is available and all the options that are available. The committees ensure the supervision, the follow-up, and the evaluation of the implementation of decisions taken by the Union and its organs. So basically, again, the peer review of what has been done, and also, following up, making sure that you stick to your targets, and that you actually recognize where you are not really on track and try to speed up the processes to achieve your targets. So those are some of the things that these technical committees do. So basically, that's a repetition of the same thing: harmonization, coordination. So in terms of the meetings, it meets as many times as is necessary because these are committees. The committees are the lifeblood of whatever happens in an organization, because it's the committees that deal with an issue closely. And then deal with it, at least in theory, they're supposed to deal with it exhaustively because they're just focusing on specific issues. So they are supposed to work as long as there are problems that committee has to fix. So the purpose, then we have Article 17 with the Pan-African Parliament. The purpose of the Pan-African Parliament, as I've said before, is to ensure full participation of African peoples in the development and economic integration of the continent. I've said before that it even gives an opportunity for opposition politicians in the various African parliaments to be a member of an African parliament. So you don't have to be the ruling party only in order to have a seat in the Pan-African Parliament, which means that when it meets, it has a very diverse diverse group of political interests, on the continent. And then we have the Court of Justice. I made the comment that there is a court, but there is no police. There is also no prisons. And then the financial institutions, we have the African Central Bank, the African Monetary Fund, the African Investment Bank. It is important to also think how these banks relate to the IMF, the World Bank, the BRICS Bank, and the like. So you can also just go on the website and just study further about these institutions, because these institutions are important. Because as I've been saying throughout this lecture, Africa needs funding or money to carry out its objectives or to carry out its plans. So these are the institutions that should be ensuring that the politicians have the money at their disposal when they want to do things. And then Article 20 deals with the Commission. The Commission is the organ that I told you about, where now it's being contested by different regions and by different linguistic communities. It serves the secretariat role of the Union. So meaning that it supports the work of the Union. But of course, these things work in collaboration, as I've said before. They feed they fit into the system of the assembly. They all assist the assembly, at least in theory, they're supposed to assist the assembly in everything that they do. The commission has the chair, the deputies, the commissioners, and the support staff. And it is the assembly which is responsible, which gives the commission its functions, which can determine its structure, and which can create or promulgate regulations for that govern the commission. Then we have Article 21, which deals with the Permanent Representatives Committee. So the permanent reps are permanent reps to the union. So the people who are always there representing their governments. So it basically, these permanent reps support subcommittees to carry out their work, and they report to the Executive Council, and they get their instructions from the Executive Council. And then we have Article 23, which details, among other things, the powers of the Assembly to sanction member states for the non-payment of dues. What I was telling you about, that some members do not pay their membership fees, which incapacitates the African Union from carrying out, its duties. If you don't pay your duties or your dues, there are specific sanctions that the union or the assembly can impose on you. It can take away your right to vote. It can take away your right to speak at meetings of the union or of the assembly. It can prevent you from presenting a candidate. Let's say you want a candidate from your country to be the chair of the commission. That is not going to happen. And they can deny you the benefits that come from being a member of the union. There are other sanctions, and this is what I spoke about earlier. That if you fail to comply with the decisions of the union or its policies, you can be denied the use of the transport system, the African transport network, and then you can also be denied the communication links. And in addition to this, any economic and political sanction deemed fit by the assembly may be applied to you. In terms of languages, the official languages of the African Union are African languages, Arabic, English, French, and Portuguese. But in reality, the documents of the African Union are found in Arabic, English, French, and Portuguese. I've heard that some are trying to write in Swahili, but most African languages are not official languages of the African Union in reality. Of course, this is not a minor issue, because we have scholars like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has been an advocate of the use of African languages, particularly in literature, to communicate African ideas, and also just to move away from the burden of English, of thinking that in order to say things well, we have to say them in English, when in actual fact they can be said in local languages. And he has decided to use Kikuyu, his local language, to write some of his novels, even though he began writing in English. So meaning that the issue of language in Africa is not a minor issue. And also it brings back the idea of Babylon, where people had so many tongues and they couldn't understand each other, which might also be a stumbling block towards ensuring communication or effective communication on the continent, both at a diplomatic level and the bureaucratic level, and also at the person-to-person level, and even when doing trade on the continent. The court is responsible for the interpretation of this constitution. So whatever I've been saying to you, it doesn't matter really unless the court has the same interpretation that I have. So your interpretation also will not matter unless you are a judge at the court and a matter of interpretation has been brought for you to deliberate and decide. If you want to be a member, if you want to join the union, you tell the chairman that you intend to join the union and you intend to follow all its laws. We have come to the end of our lecture. I think that we've covered a lot of ground in such a short period of time. And I hope that this lecture will be useful to you as you continue your journey of understanding politics in the 21st century. Thank you very much and goodbye.